Good morning and welcome to the podcast, which may well be a little bit longer than usual. It is Tuesday, the 25th of March. The UK is gearing up for the spring statement on Wednesday, which is what my blog was about this morning and what yesterday's podcast was about. But there were two pieces in the Irish Times that I want to discuss, and essentially this podcast is going to be about the differences between the BBC, obviously the state broadcaster in the UK, and RTE, which is the state broadcaster in Ireland. Now, I have the big complaint against the BBC has been its bias, and I certainly have complained about that before. But it's only until you actually leave the country, and in my case, return to Ireland, where you really begin to enjoy and appreciate the beauty that is the BBC. So, and this is relevant because I saw a piece in Ireland or in the Irish Times, and it was headlined because they're talking about Irish unity right now. That's sort of bubbling along under the surface. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the headline was, would a united Ireland really say goodbye to the BBC? No better example of the complex relationships, not just between the North and South, but between Ireland and Britain, than our intertwined media ecologies. And within that piece, it says rightly, Irish people consume a lot of British media, which I have said for years, and probably accounts for a large part of my West Brit attitude. And the Fintan O'Toole, who I rarely like, but in an excellent piece today, just discussing how Ireland has been ducking and diving between the EU, the United States, and the United Kingdom for years, and is now going to have to choose. He compares Ireland to the Artful Dodger. I just basically think they've been a bit of a slut when it comes to international affairs, although correctly so. And it's Fintan O'Toole in that piece also says, again rightly, it remained, though we don't like to acknowledge this is Ireland, closely entwined with Britain, not least through the sharing of a common popular culture. So this is key. When I was talking about first of all, when people talk about Irish unity to me, I actually still think they're talking about Ireland rejoining the United Kingdom. And I tweeted something like that on Saturday saying the idea that Conor McGregor could run as president is yet another reason why Ireland should rejoin the Union. And I can tell you that went down like a bucket of sick over there on Twitter. A lot of people got very cross. So when people talk about Irish unity, the majority of people in Ireland, they are envisaging the six counties coming back into the Republic and leaving the United Kingdom. When I hear the phrase Irish unity, for a split second, I'm thinking, oh, right, does that mean we're heading back into Britain, we're joining the Union again? That's how much of a West Brit I am. Although I will say that's probably a minority of perhaps 15 people in the entire Republic, perhaps 5 of whom live in this house. So I wrote a previous piece as to why if Ireland was to be united and was to look a little bit more British, these are the things I wanted. And one of them was not just Waitrose and the National Trust expansion, but also being able to access BBC iPlayer, which is a huge loss. But it seems, according to Hugh Lenihan, that if Irish unity, namely the 6 counties joined the Republic, became a reality, there's a serious risk that the 6 counties themselves could lose the BBC, which, if I lived up there, would be reason enough to vote against it. So he says the viewing of UK television has long been seen as an inalienable right. This is within the Republic, codified in the years after the Belfast Agreement by requiring cable and satellite platforms to make each jurisdiction's channels available to the other. And then it says, meanwhile, in both the Republic and the UK, the place of the national broadcaster as a key instrument of national identity and national cohesion persists despite the fragmentation of media itself. Now, this is true. But what he's saying is that Irish people watch RTE and British people watch the BBC despite Netflix and despite Prime and all the rest of it. And I've said previously I have issues with Netflix because of the huge amount of American media on there. And he goes on, it's a little surprising then that amid the rising volume of debate about the possibility of Irish reunification, there has been little or no discussion about what would happen to the existing arrangements for publicly funded media in United Ireland. And that's going to change. Um, and he asked what would happen to BBC and RTE. And would those who live in the north, or indeed further down in the south, lose access to that? And then within that, he says, actually, BBC Sounds is BBC Sounds is the app that you can listen to for all the BBC radios. And this was news to me. Supposedly, after spring 2025, this year, you're not going to be able to listen to BBC Sounds outside the UK, which I found distressing, to say the least. Because when Hugh Lenihan talks about, each people in Ireland watching RTE and people in Britain consuming the BBC, what he also alluded to previously, further up in the article, making this very long-winded, is that a lot of Irish people consume British media. And this is absolutely the case. And I think, and I spoke about this previously in a podcast, I think what added to my West Britishism before I married an English person and lived there for 20 years is that growing up, I lived in a house that consumed a huge amount of British media. So the BBC News was on, if not more than at least as much as the RTE News. And my mother watched all the soaps, as I said, all the EastEnders in your Coronation Street and your Brookside, which I do think makes a difference. I mean, we were just a very Anglo house. We had, myself and my brother have Anglo names, although granted my brother is called Patrick. We consumed British media. We watched British sports, whereas you could have another house in Ireland. And we didn't watch any GAA. We never played any GAA. None of that was on in the house. Now, does that mean that this is the same as living in Bradford or being brought up in Birmingham or Bromley? No, it doesn't. But it's certainly not the same as being brought up in Galway, where all the channels are just RTE, and you're ferried around to the Gaelic and hurling matches every weekend, and that's the only thing you do. And the girls do Irish dancing and the boys play hurling, and they're all called Niamh and Connor, and all the rest of it. They're two very different upbringings. And I had the more Anglo upbringing, which I think accounts for much of my West British-like tendencies. And just to labour that point a little bit more, I mean, you're still Irish, and there's still big differences between the two, but it's a different upbringing than, say, a very Gaelic upbringing that other children would have had. And particularly if you were lucky enough to be a teenager in the 90s, which I was, I mean, the absolute dominant theme then, particularly I think along the Pale, along the east coast of Ireland, was British culture. This was Tony Blair. This was the height of Cool Britannia. And if you think that, and that was lived over in my neck of the woods anyway. I mean, we watched the Premier League that was coming out of the sort of the riots and the grim 80s, and a lot of money was being showered on that, and that filtered down. So the big teams were, and in the 80s it was Liverpool, which is essentially Ireland, and in the 90s it was Man United. So that's what we were watching. And the music we were consuming were all Oasis and Blur. Now, some of my friends did listen to the American music like Green Day and Nirvana, but they were always far too hardcore for me. So that is true. So Fintan O'Toole is right in terms of your sort of pivoting between, there of course is Americana influence there, and I think that's much stronger now because of streaming services like Netflix, and we of course consumed American movies such as Clueless. But the Cool Britannia that hit in the late 90s and the early noughties absolutely transferred, certainly to my house and my upbringing. We were all going to Oasis concerts and Blur concerts and Pulp concerts. I mean, I don't remember listening to any Irish band at all. So this is the dominating cultural theme. And culture, as most people understand, is far more important than politics, far more important and far more influential. Um, but anyway, so that's the background. So the idea that Irish unity, and they mean the Republican kind and not my unionist kind, would mean losing BBC iPlayer for the six counties. Well, that would certainly concentrate my mind. And then what triggered me, as I said, with sounds due to be made UK only later this year, and iPlayer already geo restricted, true and devastating. The golden age of Irish freeloading may be drawing to a close. Will we end up with a new version of single channel land? Please, please, please no. Please no. In fact, if this whole Irish unity thing is going to happen, the red line should be that we still get to consume, we still get our BBC and our BBC Two. In fact, we get full access to the iPlayer, even if it means throwing them some money. And can we please have BBC Sounds back? That's my red line for the entire island. The entire island. We have to have that. So it would nearly Irish unity be nearly worth it for that alone. Now, the idea that I'm going to use BBC Sounds is really quite devastating to me, and I googled it, and it's confirmed. However, I will be able to listen to BBC Radio 4 still, it seems, through the app, because my day starts with getting up, becoming civilized, and then I'm always up before everybody else in the house. So as I'm getting the breakfast ready and emptying dishwashers, well, that's normally done the night before, and all the rest of it, I listen to BBC Radio 4. I listen to the Day programme with my earphones through BBC Sounds. So the idea I wouldn't be able to start my day off like that in County Meath is very worrying indeed. But my Google searches say that I will lose everything but BBC Radio 4. So I can just about live with that, because as I was driving the car, this is about 6 months ago, and I was listening to BBC Radio 4, obviously, and I think it was one of these, it was a program actually about the BBC, and it was said in a very sort of light-hearted fashion, oh, the long wave, which I assume is what is picked up in the car, will also be going in a number of years. Now, I nearly crashed the car at the idea I would not be able to listen to Radio 4 in the car. I'm hoping that won't happen either. So I'm not particularly happy right now about the idea that I could lose Radio 4 in the car. I could lose BBC Sounds on the phone. Obviously, because I currently can't get BBC iPlayer. And before you tell me I can get BBC iPlayer through VPN or something, look, I want to be able to consume BBC iPlayer as a right, as a citizen, okay? Because it's a superior product. I don't want to have to look like, I don't have to behave like some sort of criminal where I get my VPN and enter my old Bromley postcode and watch it illegally. That's not what I want to do. I want it to be bequeathed to me out of the goodness of their heart over there. So you might be wondering, well, what's wrong with this woman? Like, why doesn't she just consume RTE? I mean, what's the problem? And it comes down to this. Now, I will say that I have the RTE Radio 1, which is the equivalent of BBC Radio 4. It is right beside this. It's a station right beside BBC Radio 4 in my car. So I flick between the two to get the headlines between the two. And what you and you can nearly consume both headlines in 10 minutes. So what you need to understand if you're going to pull this trick, especially when it comes to the 6 o'clock headlines, is RTE run the Angelus for about 2 minutes. So their headlines don't kick in until 6:02. In the meantime, BBC Radio 4 have gotten through the 6 dongs of Big Ben and most of the headlines. And then they go back and they discuss the headlines in detail. Whereas RTE go through the Angelus, give about 60 seconds over the headlines, and then cut to an ad. Well, what's that about? So if I was to compare the two channels, and I don't think there is a person on either island who knows the two channels better, it is, and I feel like a bit of a traitor saying this, but it's true. BBC Radio 4 is simply a superior product to RTE. First of all, RTE has ads, which everybody knows are annoying. And although they are serious broadcasters, and I feel a bit mean having said that, and the researchers are serious, and they do explore serious problems, overall the tone, if you compare both of them, and simply the programs, are are far more serious. So RTE relies heavily on phone-ins. Joe Duffy being the main one during the day that my father absolutely adores and listens to all the time. Does he cover some serious issues? Yes, he does. When the child abuse scandals broke, he gave a huge amount of airtime to people who were seriously abused, usually by the Catholic Church. And I think that's literally a public service. I think that's incredibly important. But there are too many phone-in programs on RTE Radio 1, and mainly, I would assume, because they're cheap to produce. So if you look at Radio 4, for instance, I mean, if you just look across their 9 o'clock schedule across the week, the first nine, well, you kick off your day obviously with the Today program, and then on Mondays at 9 o'clock there's a Life Scientific, and on Tuesday they have More or Less, which goes into statistics. On Thursdays they have In Our Time, which is very highbrow. Sometimes I don't always listen to it because it's so highbrow. On Friday, of course, you've got your Desert Island Discs. On Monday, I think there is Start of the Week. Those programs alone, if you compare to what's going on at 9 o'clock on RT, are very serious programs. And then, of course, there's usually some 15-minute filler between 9:45 and then you go into Woman's Hour at 10 o'clock. Now, is Woman's Hour my favourite programme? No, it is not. But it is always usually a very, very interesting listen. You've got your Archers, and you've got Moral Maze, which I've been on previously. You've got Any Questions on a Friday, which I've also been on previously. It's just, as I said, a superior product, because if there was one difference between the BBC and the RT, I think it's the word seriousness. The BBC Radio 4 is a serious channel and has serious programs, and RT do have some serious programs on there, but it's never quite the same. You've got the Reith lectures, for instance, which you can download on BBC Sounds and listen to. This year it was on violence. It was a criminal psychologist was giving the 4 Reith lectures. They're always really interesting, and there's no equivalent in Ireland. I mean, there should be, but there isn't. So that is sort of what I wanted to say in relation to the BBC and RT and Irish unity, the Republican kind, and unfortunately not my kind, namely the Republic rejoining the Union, which, if the reaction to Twitter is anything to go by, won't be happening anytime soon. I was told numerous times to go and live there if I wanted to, and then I would point out that I had lived in London for 20 years, and I was told in no uncertain terms to move back, which we cannot do for various reasons. So that's the media landscape right now. Now I'm going to talk about maybe 3 other things. So returning to economics yesterday, we had, as we all know, where Rachel is getting out the chainsaw, and you can read about that on my piece today. She's going to snatch, things are so bad, they're going to snatch the hot meals from the nursery children and the reception children. I mean, I'm laughing. It's no laughing matter. Instead of closing and enforcing the borders and stopping putting up illegal immigrants to the tune of billions of pounds, they've decided to steal the hot food off the 5-year-olds. And not only are they going to steal their lunch from them, they're going to grab all the sports equipment from the sports hall while they're at it. They're the kind of cuts they're thinking about. And I covered that today in the piece. It's well worth reading. And hot on the heels of stealing the lunch from the 5-year-olds, Andrew Bailey in the Times today, tariffs and ageing population threaten UK economy. Mm-hmm. They certainly do. As I said and explained yesterday, the really, really big spends are health, of course, and pensions, which is just another way of saying the ageing population, which, if I'm honest, is one of the reasons why we left. So the opening gambit there in the Times, Labour's hopes for growth have been dealt a blow. after the governor of the Bank of England warned that tariffs and aging population pose major threats to the economy. So the problem with this is the tariffs, even if you think the tariffs can be avoided, they can enter into an agreement with Trump and somehow the tariffs can be avoided. The aging population is structural, as is the NHS, as is the pensions. That is nearly that they can't change that. So unless they can get more growth into the economy, which they will struggle to do because on their last budget they decided to increase taxes and uh, put a huge amount of spending out there. It was on here. So as he says, a 40 billion a year tax rise in the autumn budget and 70 billion of spending increases. Um, there's very much there's not much more they can do. That there's nothing you can do really about your aging population. So these are structural problems and long-term problems coming after, I think Andrew Bailey said, 15 years of stagnation. So in a bleak assessment of Britain's economic prospects before the spring statement on Wednesday, Andrew Bailey said a 15-year stagnation in productivity was dragging down living standards and that there were strong headwinds against growth. So the big problem with the UK economy, which is probably, the logical reason not to go back into the union, is this outrageous 15 years of stagnation, and the aging population along with a socialised health system. Now, he did try and strike an optimistic note. Yes, this is it. They're hanging their hats on artificial intelligence and technology that will transform Britain's prospects and spread innovation across the economy. Well, I wouldn't bank on that. And the reason for that is, I think, again, illegal immigration. Illegal immigration, people will come in and are willing to do these jobs at rock bottom prices illegally, which stops companies investing in things like artificial intelligence, and probably is probably the reason for the stagnation. I said Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is preparing to announce about 15 billion worth of cuts to public spending in her spring statement after a significant downgrade in Britain's growth forecasts, another downgrade, and some Labour MPs and officials have warned the cuts will represent a return to austerity, a claim the government has rejected. So it's always bad news. It's all bad news when it comes to the economy in the UK, and Wednesday will be no exception. I expect it's going to be quite brutal on Wednesday. So that's the economic news coming out of London right now. The second last subject I'm going to touch on, again, rather reluctantly, but I will, because it was covered on RTE, speaking of RTE, on Irish Media last night on the Katie Hannon show, is this, I've never seen a programme, Adolescence, get as much airtime as this programme. It's actually incredible. This is, again, the fictional 14-year-old Jamie who spends far too much time on his smartphone in his room, and ends up stabbing a female classmate. Now, real crimes have had less coverage than this. And as I said in my piece yesterday, I mean, actual black teenagers are dying because they're being stabbed by fellow black teenagers. And you would never get the media coverage that the fictional killing of a white girl by the white kid gets. It is really quite stunning. And as I said in my piece yesterday, the chances of your 14-year-old white boy from a two-parent family going and stabbing somebody are thankfully for now quite slim. However, sadly, the chances of your white boy actually being a victim of crime is much higher. And if you, in fact, it was only earlier this year, and it hasn't, now it's before trial, it didn't garner any media attention at all. Just after, it was Leo Ross. Now this is pre-trial. He was 12, and I tell you, I'll link to it in the show notes. May he rest in peace, and it's absolutely your worst nightmare as a family stabbed while walking home from school on Tuesday afternoon. And I wrote about this at the time. I think I said something about Brits ignored kids stabbing kids, which I probably stand by. He was stabbed by a 14-year-old. We don't know we don't know anything else about the 14-year-old because it's pre-trial, and he's a minor. But I remember thinking this barely got any coverage, and that actually happened. Whereas Adolescence is a fictional story about crime, and it's wall to wall, and there are a number of reasons for this. I think some of them I'm going to ignore. For instance, some on the right are doing this is a psychops. You're the usual. You're being played. They're just softening up the population for like internet censorship. It's a Trojan horse. You're not going to be able to read your conservative media online anymore, etc., etc. Look, I don't think that's the case, but that's sort of the line right now. There are a number of reasons why Adolescence has gotten the coverage I do. First of all, it involves white parenting and white children, and that will definitely generate you a lot of media, because the media and the lifestyle pieces and the media cultural pieces are written by people like me. And it's the same reason why the MasterChef guy got like 2 weeks of media coverage, because he got a bit handsy with the white middle class women. Is if you annoy or terrify white middle class women, then you will get attention. So white middle class women getting terrified over either their little boy going around stabbing people will generate media headlines, or indeed their little girl being stabbed by white guy will generate media attention. They control the news. Okay, white middle class people, both men and increasingly women. They're often producers, they're the editors. So if you can either annoy them or certainly tap into their deepest fears, that will get you headlines. And that's what Adolescence does. Okay, black kids stabbing black kids gets some media headlines now and again, but it doesn't get this sort of very visceral, emotional reaction that this show has garnered. And I haven't watched it. I've been told that it's I'm sure it's very clever and extremely well acted, because you don't need to tell me that social media is dangerous for teenage boys. I mean, again, a lot of on the right are saying, oh, well, this is just a moral panic and there's nothing wrong with it. I don't agree with that. I've already accepted social media is a danger to white boys, both themselves and if they act it out on others. I think parents should be controlling it more. I've said all that. But the sort of reaction that this show has gotten is, as I said, essentially because it deals with white middle class concerns. Again, if you rape white working class girls for years in places like Rotherham, that won't get you the same type of media attention. It'll get you some, but certainly nowhere near the type of media attention that Adolescence has. Because, as I said before in a previous blog, some victims count and some victims don't. White working class girls who are raped by Muslim men are not worthy victims. Fictional white middle class girl stabbed by schoolmate, she counts. She's fictional, but she counts. People will care a lot more about that fictional victim than they will about the white working class girls. That's just a fact. I mean, you can see what this is what this has generated. I mean, Adolescence was on, as I said, it made it onto RTE, Katie Hannon. Even at the height of the Muslim rape gang scandal and Starmer coming under an incredible amount of pressure, that didn't touch Irish media. It didn't touch the Irish Times because I was watching closely, and it didn't touch the broadcast media. In fact, I remember getting a call from Katie Hannon, show, I think it was, I can't remember. And they were asking me, did I want to come on and talk about eulogies in churches? And I said, no. I said, I can come on and talk about the Muslim rape gangs if you want. Surprisingly enough, they weren't interested in that. So that is part of the reason why, as I said, I always go for the simple explanation. It's not a conspiracy. It's not really a moral panic, because there is some truth to it. The propaganda wouldn't be effective if there wasn't some truth to it. And deep down, most middle class mothers know that their teenage sons spend too much time on social media. That there is a truth to that, and they've exploited it, to say, well, this is what could happen to him, or worse, this is what could happen to your daughter. It's fictional, but this is what could happen. So that explains why we're all still talking about adolescence. It's incredible. I expect that will continue on for some time to come. Now, while we're saying that, and I may write this instead of podcasting it, is deep down, we all also know that not only are the teenagers, oh yeah, that was it. If it's always been the case, societies have always struggled to control boys when they're really cute, then turning into men. Because and that's why, certainly in tribal societies, and even we've always had rites of passage. Okay, if you went to Africa, and I'm not being sort of stereotypical here, they will when the boys are turning into men, there will be rites of passages. They will bring them hunting. They may well do some nasty things to them. Okay, where they're separated out from the girls, and they are taken aside by the men, and they are instructed, this is what your tribe expects from you. Now, the problem with the West is they don't know what they want to say to their young men now, to the boys becoming men. Are they to be protectors and providers? Well, that will annoy the feminists, because women have been told that the young women and girls are in fact better providers. It seems now they're out earning them, certainly in their 20s. They don't want to put any emphasis on strength. They don't like that being highlighted, that men are on average much stronger than women. So there's I can tell you, if you went to Asian societies or tribal societies, they're pretty clear. They still know what they want from them young men, but the West don't. So they're struggling, but they always know deep down that young men go wrong. When young men go wrong, they can inflict a serious amount of damage, not just on themselves, but on society. If young women go wrong, then the fallout isn't as obvious. But when young men go wrong, the fallout is very obvious. Okay, so this is what's caused this essential moral panic. What are we going to do? What is the message that we're going to do? Especially if we spent the last 20 years saying, oh, it doesn't matter if boys are brought up by single moms. There's no downside to that at all. And now it turns out, oh well, actually, maybe the fathers do have their uses in keeping sons in line. Okay, so this is what's caused this. Now, young social media has increased self-harm, certainly in America, amongst young women. And that, interestingly, hasn't generated much media attention. If young men also in the United States, and I think the suicide rate has certainly increased. If young men were only killing themselves as a result of social media, no one would care. You would not get your Netflix program, and even if you did, it wouldn't generate these media headlines. But it's the worry that these nice young white boys might go off and hurt the nice young white women. That ultimately is what's causing the panic. Okay, because the people in the media and who control the media are nice white middle class parents. So deep down, they're wondering if they're really doing a good job. So I think I've said enough on adolescence, but it is a very useful tool to analyze what gets media attention and what doesn't. So I'm going to end on civilizational collapse, because I saw something yesterday on Twitter and I thought it was absolutely outrageous. And this is the underarm serve. So there was a Ukrainian, now I didn't know this at the time, there was a Ukrainian tennis player on match point against this is female, against a Russian. And she won the match with an underarm serve. And it says, I've brought up the headline here, which I think is outrageous. I play a lot of tennis. The underarm serve on the first serve is legal. However, it is not cricket, as they say. The men have been doing it for a while. I think Andy Murray did it once. So it has been on the men's circuit, but to see the women do it is, as I said, nothing short of civilization collapse. So the headline here, didn't see that, you don't see that often. Ukrainian tennis ace leaves Russian rival red-faced with rare move that has commentator stunned. So a Ukrainian Marta Kozaki progressed to the Miami Open round of 16 with a 6-2, 6-1 win. In fairness, she was well beaten over the Russian Anna Blinkova. So obviously there's a lot of background there, but I still think it's a very low way to win a match. It's very poor sportsmanship. I don't approve of it at all. I would never lower myself to do the underarm serve ever, let alone on match point. So this is typical now. Fans were impressed by the boldness and praised the way she won the clash. This is typical. This is typical. What a way to win the match. Exactly. A low blow. It wasn't a great serve. So this is typical that this poor sportsmanship is being praised. It's just up there with men wearing hoodies and people not drinking their coffee in a civilized way, which I've written about before and will link to in the notes. Underarm serves, particularly on match point, is just wrong. It's just morally wrong and poor sportsmanship, and people shouldn't do it. So that's the podcast for today. Coming in at 36 minutes, I decided to indulge myself a little bit more today. And please do leave comments below the line if you have anything interesting to say. And I will try and do another podcast tomorrow. Thank you.